You're listening to, or watching, the Talk With Your Mouth Full podcast, a podcast series that features real conversations with real people about substance abuse prevention. This episode features a discussion with substance abuse prevention speakers who share their personal experiences along with tips on how to prevent children from using substances. This episode was graciously filmed on location at Kapow in Boca Raton, Florida. We thank Kapow for their amazing food and hospitality, and we encourage you to check them out if you're ever in the area.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thank everyone so much for coming. Welcome to the Talk With Your Mouth Full podcast. So, for the families who are watching, my name is Teresa Barros, and I am the program director at Living Skills in the Schools. Everyone at the table already knows me. Islorn, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Hi, my name is Islorn. I am the prevention coordinator here at Living Skills in the Schools.
Excellent. So all of you, we're going to just do some introductions. You guys are all our prevention speaker, which we'll talk about pretty much throughout dinner. But if we could just go around the table and share names, how long you've been a speaker for us, and how long you've been in recovery. Katie.
Hi, my name's Katie, and I've been with LSIS for 2 years. I have been in recovery for 5.5 years.
Excellent. Great.
My name's Mariana, and I've been in recovery for 7 years.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Lindsay, and I've been with LSIS for about 2 years in recovery as well. I have 15 years in April.
Wow. Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
My name is Danny. I've been speaking here with LSIS for I think about 1.5 years now, right? And I've been in recovery for 3 years now.
So for the families who are watching, our prevention program, our prevention speaker program, features people like yourselves who are in recovery. You go into schools to share your story with the students. And as all of you know, during the training process, we kind of go over how it's a little different. All of you are pretty used to sharing your stories. But this way, we're really trying to get a prevention message home to the students. So today, our hope is that we can talk a little bit about how you came about to sort of formulate how you do it. So I guess we'll just kind of leave that open. Islorn is our rep, so you guys are mostly familiar with her.
Yes.
So truthfully, she knows way more about it than I do.
Yes, so basically just like how we normally do in schools, we're just opening up the conversation just like we do with the kids and how we formulate that around that. We're going to keep the same attitude and then just see where the conversation takes us.
Does anybody have a favorite age group?
Oh, I would say middle schoolers. The 12 and 13 would be my favorite.
Yeah.
Fifth graders.
Yeah.
I love the young ones.
They are fun.
My
Yeah.
opinion on that always is changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The 3rd to 5th graders are the most fun to do, but the most impactful ones where the kids say where you have really cool conversations is usually with the older kids.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
I agree with that for sure.
How do you guys feel how have you noticed what you've done different with the way you share your story? How's it evolved? Because I know, I hear your stories, and Islorn, I think you hear them too. You notice the difference between the first time you share and then, the more you do it, it sort of keeps evolving. What have you guys noticed?
You start to see the common questions that come up, so you know how to shape your story to pique their interest or to get them to listen. And particularly with the younger kids, I think shaping our story so we speak with them in a language that they understand, which was really difficult in the beginning, but using words where, it won't confuse them. So that's where I really have found that my story has either evolved or just changed slightly to make sure that I'm getting the right message across.
Have you noticed anything that you specifically add now that you didn't originally?
I think for me, what I've added is helping them understand that now I've realized, whereas at the time of doing that, I may have not realized it because I was under the influence. So I try to help them understand that, and I've added that in my story so it's very clear to them that at the time I made these decisions based on, the fact that I wasn't thinking clearly. But now I've realized and so that they can see, the difference in thinking, of course.
Well, and that speaks to kind of our philosophy as a whole too, right? Because we're trying to get kids to understand it always starts with, I'm just going to try it, right? And then it progresses. And I think one of the things that when we do our parent programs, we always want to explain to the parents, like, you have to help a kid understand. Even when I'm like supervising clinicians, I always point out, you can do psychoeducation, right? You can teach, but this is a disease where people's thinking has changed. And while they're struggling, they don't think clearly. You can give them logic,
Right.
but it quickly gets undone.
That
So-
that totally reminds me actually of and also what you had said is, like, I now also say in my story how I didn't want this to happen. Like, this wasn't my plan. And before I knew it, it took a hold of me. And just to kind of piggyback off what you said, like, our thinking wasn't clear, and this whole time we had that delusion of control. And the reality was that we lost control, and that it wasn't my plan to end up becoming an addict alcoholic.
I think when I began to speak, it was definitely a learning process. It was definitely learning to tell the story in a different way. Like you said, we've all been comfortable telling our stories to a lot of people who are also in recovery and struggle with addiction, and that's a very, very different story. Those people all understand what addiction is, and we're not trying to explain it to them. We're just talking about what we went through, and there's just like a commonality to it. But when you're explaining it, like you just said, to children, you want to talk about how you might have thought about it at that age, or didn't think about it at that age. And especially, like you said, how you were unaware of it back in the day, realizing that the 11th graders or high schoolers going through it, a lot of them might not like have any idea that they're on that path yet. So talking about it like it was when I was in their shoes a little bit more was a learning process.
I think you touched on a really good point there. It's so important to be, at least when I go into schools, we do it from, the little kids up to the seniors. So it's learning your story, and something I realized is I learn more about myself every time I tell my story to these kids. And it's so impactful. I mean, as much as it is for them, for me, what an experience. But I think so age appropriate. It's one of the reasons why LSIS I believe does such great work, because there's just so many different levels for the kids to understand, which is, I don't know, I love doing this.
I love that you say, like, you notice it sort of impacts you too, because Danny, one of the things that you share in your story is that if you want to feel better in general, if you want to feel good about yourself, help somebody else, right? Like, you're really teaching the kids that, like, if you work on being kinder to other people, you naturally will feel better. So it kind of matches that whole thing you're talking about. Like, I do this and it, changes the way I see my story, and it just, you learn more about yourself. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I had to learn to reconnect to my story. I think I told my story for so long and for so many years. I was telling it as if I was the narrator, right? Like, as if I was reading a book, not really connecting or feeling the emotion behind it. So for me, it is important for the kids to see the emotion behind it, because it was a very painful experience. And I want them to see that I was the person who lived that experience, and that it is painful. Because I think for adolescents, it's in their eyes, or maybe even in their community or culture, it's cool to, use drugs or to drink. And when they hear somebody from experience tell their story with the emotion attached, it just hits differently.
Yeah. I was actually just at a high school recently, and it was a driver's ed class that you had just spoken to maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And of course, we always start with, okay, so what do you guys remember? And I said, I know you had a speaker here. I think you guys had Mariana. What do you remember? And one student very quickly had said, I can't believe she kept using, even though she knew she could die. And, like, it's a horrifying reality, but what an opportunity for me to point out, do you see how the logic is lost? right? How your thinking has totally changed, right? Everyone's story highlights a different part of addiction.
Yeah. But one thing that never changes for any speakers, prevention speakers, is that they all cross that line into addiction. So a lot of time, one thing, like, it doesn't matter which age range we talk to the kids, it always circle around back to, you know, their friend groups, like the adults in their life. So it's like, for them, when it's like, well, why don't that person just stop? You know, why can't they just stop? They know how much they're hurting the people around them, or, you know, they know how much they're hurting themselves, but trying to make them understand the concept of addiction and like what it actually does. Normally they always, like, when you explain to them, like, there's no going back. You can only learn from that. So I think that's like opening up that conversation is always get them to like start to think up a little bit different on the people around them and then the things that they do.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, you know, we call this talk with your mouth full because the research says families who dine together have, you know, lower rates of substance abuse.
Participating in LSIS and knowing that study, though, has definitely reshaped my mind as being a parent now and with my children and how I present to them at the dinner table and even outside of that.
They're pretty little too. How old are they again?
3 and 4.
Oh,
babies.
My cousin has 2 little kids, and one of them I think is about 4, and he has a super deep voice. His father did too when he was little, and they were dropping him off at a brand new school. It was like new preschool, and mom's thinking not much about it and just driving, and he's sitting in the back seat in his little seat, and he goes, "Mommy, I'm nervous."
Oh,
and I thought, like, how does this kid know the word nervous?
Goodness gracious.
But like, how great that
Right.
he's 4 and he could identify and label nervous. You know? Yeah. Mariana, what would you tell parents?
So many good points that have been brought up. I definitely think parents need to be informed, just as much as the kid, of course, before approaching the kid. Talking to them and teaching them how to identify feelings, but also giving them that safe space to talk about feelings. And I think for me, most important is teaching our children boundaries and healthy relationships, what those healthy relationships look like. Is super important, you know, because a lot of times you can find yourself in a toxic friendship or relationship, you know, that could be the kickstart or trigger to your using at some point, you know. But identifying feelings, identifying, you know, healthy and unhealthy relationships, whether that's with friends, family, eventually, you know, intimate partner, and, you know, educating yourself on what addiction looked like, because I didn't know. Once again, it went back to, I'm just having fun. What do you mean this is not addiction? I'm just having fun.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was 27 that I was like, okay, this is addiction.
Yeah, here I am. Yeah.
You know, but if I had that clear picture painted for me at 12, 13, 14, 15 even, it would be very difficult to deny it or to kind of like shut it out, because it's there. The facts are there, you know?
Definitely something Danny spends in his story. I noticed a few months back, Danny like pauses and talks about, this is what they looked like. They looked like me. They weren't falling down. They weren't dropping out of school. They
Weren't
were
missing teeth.
Yeah, like they looked like me, you know, helping kids understand that part. You know, one of the things when we do parent programs, a lot of times we have people who, like, we'll do a parent program and people will come and I'll say, oh, you know, how old are your kids? And they'll say, oh, you know, I have 2, they're 13 and 10, but I'm a teacher, so I'm here really not for them. They don't need it. And I'm like, to try to sort of tie in, like, no, some kids don't need it until a certain point. You know, there's time where that progresses, and you don't, as a parent, know when that progression happens. Danny talks about, you know, your mom saying, you know, Danny, don't do drugs, you know, keep in mind you have ADHD, you can tell your kids that, your friends that, and you talk about how, like, Mom, I know, but boy did that change, right?
Rapidly.
Yeah.
Yeah, really the second I was suddenly around people who did it, my whole world changed. It was from like drugs were the, I talk about this, and when I talk to kids, drugs were the example I'd seen in health class where they show you really, really scary images of what happens to, and now it looks like the person in the school that everyone likes, just like that. And you know, my mom's advice became relevant all of a sudden. And yeah, that was definitely not something I felt like I had the tools for, or any knowledge of. So yeah, that's I keep that in mind all the time.
So we put in a couple appetizers. I have the wok charred edamame.
Yum.
We can put the peels in here. Cauliflower. And pork belly lollipops.
That looks amazing.
I'll take a couple
That looks
menus out of the
amazing.
way
Sure.
just so we
Thank
can
you.
use some when we order.
Yeah, I think I'm ready to order too.
Okay. And we have 2 calamaris coming as well.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, I'll start over here.
I'll go with a poke bowl because
Poke
it's
bowl?
all I ever have. The tuna poke bowl.
Perfect.
I'm obsessed with tuna pokies.
You like spicy?
Not too spicy. I'm spicy enough.
Okay. And then for you?
I'll have the steak lo mein.
How would you like the steak prepared?
Medium rare.
Perfect. And then for you?
Hey, tuna poke, but can I get the, instead of white rice, can I get brown rice?
I don't have brown rice, but
Okay.
I can sub it for greens if you'd like.
White rice is fine.
White rice?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And can I get the barbecue duck and ginger fried rice?
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you.
And for you, dear?
And I'll do the steak pad thai.
Steak pad thai. And how would you like the steak cooked?
Well done, please.
I think I want the 5 vegetable fried rice
Yes,
with
yeah.
chicken.
Yes, with chicken. Yeah, that one's really good.
Okay,
We'll
great.
do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
We've got like second graders who are like, "Are you talking about drugs?" And we're like, "Yeah." So let's sort of explain what that is, and fourth graders who are hearing fentanyl on the news and they don't know what that means, and you know, knowing that you can get addicted. Their friend knows, but they don't. Like, just staying on top of all of that as young as 8 and 9.
You guys give me like such helpful information throughout the years.
Yeah, teach them feelings, teach them boundaries,
Right.
medicine safety, right?
Right,
Put the
right.
medicine away. Don't take it if you
Yeah.
don't need it. Really
Yeah.
helping kids get that. So, Islan, you can talk a little bit more about how the kids receive the message.
So with the kids, I noticed that a lot of time if they have a teacher that's more engaged, actually listening, participating, asking questions, they see the teacher as like a parent figure. So oftentimes the behavior of the teacher, the kids normally, you see how comfortable they get, depends on which teacher they have, they open up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So that it tells you they do want someone to listen, but someone who actually listens to them. That's someone that's gonna yell
Or lecture.
or lecture, yeah. So that's why normally when I start a conversation with them, I tell them, I was like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. You know, I'm just simply here just to inform you, educate you, and then you can choose what you want with it.
Right.
So I think a lot of times they're like, oh really? That's it? I was like, yeah.
I think that always makes the kids a little bit more open to talking, right? When we say we're not here to tell you what to do.
Right.
We're here to give you the information to let you pick.
Well, I think also it's important to say that because it didn't work for me. You know,
Right.
so my experience was when people tried to tell me what to do, I didn't do it. And so it was like, why would I expect anything different, from these kids? And also too, just to create that safe environment, to let them know, I'm not your mom or dad. You know, I'm not your authority. I'm here just to give you information. This is a safe place. Get vulnerable. Have conversations that you might not be able to have at home. I think is really important so that you can have that open, honest communication.
I think the kids are very surprised. I think they expect it to be really, really lectury and stern. And then we're just like, hey, we're going to tell your story, just trying to help you out,
Right.
and encourage you to make better decisions. And it's totally not what they expect.
And I think too, you get a better response when you're not starting off your sentence or your story with "don't do drugs." I mean, there's a bigger message behind that that kids need to hear. And I think that I didn't, at least in the time that I was in school, we didn't necessarily have education on addiction or what it looked like. For me, I was having fun. I didn't necessarily see it as addiction. And so when it was actually addiction to me as a kid, it was having fun. And at that time we did have other programs, but programs that were just, don't do drugs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was just say no, which is the generation I grew up in, just say no.
Right.
I think whenever you're going into schools and, the way that I present myself today isn't the way that I presented myself a couple of years, however many years ago, 5, I don't know, maybe 4. It took some time to fix a lot was going on up here. But the students don't expect it, right? They see somebody coming in, done up, and they look at me and they're like, there's no way. People will look at me today and be like, there's no way that you used to, be an addict or an alcoholic. And I'm like, absolutely. But a lot's changed. You gotta put the work into it as well. But I think going into schools and the kids see that, for the ones that are maybe struggling or starting to go through something, it's so essential for them to see that even though bad choices were made, even though I made bad choices and, did these things when I was young, I don't have to live like that today. I have a choice to make today. I think that that's one of the most important factors that I stress in my story, is just letting the students know that, you have a choice, and there's the wrong choice or the bad choice, the good choice, the right choice, and you just got to give them the options and present yourself, And I think for my story, I didn't eat her on the dinner table when I was young. It was more of like a fend for yourself type of thing. And, it was good. It was fun while it lasted, but there was some part of me that really earned for that family presence and that connection with my family, because I didn't really have it. So I think the students, for them to hear the variety of stories is awesome.
Because everyone's coming from, when we're talking to a classroom, we're trying to give the story that, as many kids as possible can relate to. And that's not about giving, what's most statistically the case, right? It's about offer a variety of stories so that somewhere along the way there are kids who can relate to each of that, right? Lindsay's having dinner every night and you're fending for yourself. In one classroom, we have some kids who are doing the Lindsay way and others that are doing your way.
Absolutely.
I think what you're really highlighting is challenge the stigma, right? Challenge the stigma. I think we have to do that for kids to understand their own vulnerability. Right. And I think that's one of the things that we want to use things like this podcast to help parents get. There are some specific things that you should take into a prevention conversation. One really big one is challenge the stigma. And I think the biggest way they can do that is recognize not my kid doesn't work. Right? You don't challenge the stigma when you keep believing it's not going to happen to my kids. Right? That doesn't challenge the stigma, that keeps it going, right? So your son is in middle school, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you approach it, and have you shifted your approach after kind of speaking in classrooms and doing some of the things?
Absolutely. For me, telling my story to kids in a way or in a manner that I would speak to my son and connecting, it's important, once again, connecting to my story. And when I talk to my son about, drugs and alcohol, making sure that he acknowledges and sees in me also the emotion that's connected behind it. Yeah. Rather than mom just being disconnected to what has happened in our past together. And then, in a way, kind of sending a message that to him, to kind of detach from what has happened to him, but that's why I connect so strongly with that age group, is because not only is my son 12, but that is where I started, was 12. Wow. That's where you go from 5th grade to 6th grade and the whole world changes for you. You go from being a kid, and for me, it was I went from being in 5th grade to being 21. I didn't really, for me, I kind of feel like I missed out on a childhood, unfortunately.
Yeah, in many ways you did.
So to have my son now is, you know, kind of reconnecting again to that age, and to the 12-year-old little girl that lost her childhood.
Yeah.
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 And I love how you mirror that for your son. Like, you don't avoid that happened. You acknowledge it and you approach it head on.
Right.
I love that you do that for him and for the students. And acknowledging where your son is so important, because it validates his feelings and what he also went through during that process.
Right.
Instead of ignoring it, like, okay, we're done and let's move on from our life. Like, let's go into the next chapter. It's every day you acknowledge and you help process that with him. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's cool.
And then also one thing to point out, Lindsay, every time we go from the elementary, like 5th graders, and go to middle school, you see that dynamic change. Because before in the elementary school, a lot of time the kids, they're not afraid to talk about how they feel and stuff like that. Then they go to middle school. So that's why when we talk to the 5th graders, I was like, you're going to be surrounded by the older kids because you're going to be the new kids. So trying to fit in, a lot of times we do the things that we never thought we could, just so we could be popular. Like in Danny's story, Danny talks about peer pressure, right? It wasn't someone holding him down, but he wanted to fit in. So, you know, if they were doing something, you explain it better than I do, right? What does peer pressure look like?
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Should I explain it?
Yes, you do a very
like I
well,
said
good
that
job
for-
doing it.
Yeah, that's again how I say it's peer pressure snuck up on me. Like it's not what it looks like in maybe a TV show or a movie where someone threatens you to do something or bullies you. I mean, at least it wasn't for me. I can't speak for everyone. Or bullies you into doing something you don't want to do. In my experience, it was all of the people I wanted to like me were doing something that I inherently didn't approve of. And it was like, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? Am I going to go find an entirely new group of people, or am I going to continue to be with these people who, you know, I feel like I fit in with, who give me an identity, which I wanted so bad in high school. And so I already had kind of picked these kids. They were cool. They seemed like life was simpler for them. And then all of a sudden they were doing something that I was deeply scared of, but I didn't want to pull away from that.
Remember the time the kid asked you, were you one of the cool kids? And did you hate everyone else who wasn't cool? It was so sad.
I was like, yeah, I was.
You answered it really well, though, and it was a cool moment because you said, I don't know if you remember, but I remember because I was
I
like,
don't.
oh, what a nice way to answer that. You told them, you know, the other kids probably thought I was cool, but I was a mess.
I love
You know,
that.
I wasn't nice to people.
Yeah.
I wasn't, you know, caring for the people that mattered to me. Like, you pointed out all these characteristics that you've come to understand are cooler, right? But the kids don't know that, you know? But I think that kid's question was that's what they go through. The cool kids just change, right? Yeah.
I think it goes with that old saying, you know, the people with curly hair want straight hair and the people with straight hair want curly hair. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, you want what you aren't. And I think in high school, I mean, maybe for me it was a little different. You know, I had my 3 older brothers and they were troublemakers. Thank you. And, you know, I was the person that was maybe feeling like other people had to fit in with me to be cool or whatnot. I look back at it now and it's, you know, I see those same people. Some of them are still doing the same thing. You know, some of them have gone off to college and have beautiful careers and families. And, you know, some of them ended up in jail. And some of them are just still, some of them got help. You know, some of them were like me and got help and got better, which is a beautiful thing. But I think that the comeback is definitely a lot stronger than the setback, but it took a lot of time to, you know, find peace and continue on with it. As explaining the story to the students, you know, we talk about our drug addiction and our lives, and for my story, I always make sure I touch on the like mental health part, because I got better physically, but my mental health was still so bad. And you know, it took a lot of time to get that better, and that's where like the teaching to the kids of the importance of sharing your feelings and like having a counselor or your school teacher or your parents, you know, that trusted adult I think is so important to have, because When I was young, I had one, but I didn't use them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Each of you used your first time using was at a different age. I think you all might be around the same, but one of the things I think prevention always works if you get ahead of it early enough, like as soon as possible you want to get ahead of it. If you guys look at the age where you first started, that by then, right, something's already happened to get you there. So when you look at prevention for you, right, it isn't, no, don't have that. Prevention is way before that. So where would you have seen prevention for you, right? Lindsay, you talked about, like, if I knew how to share my feelings, that would have been a little different, I think, right? And can anyone think of, like, where it would have been different for them?
I can definitely think of where it would have been different. I would, like you said, start in elementary school where we start. I would want to start learning things then because, like you said, talking about the mental health is so important. And I was going through it back then. As I think mental health struggles go for a lot of people, I thought mine were really unique and I didn't think there was something I could get help with and that other people understood and went through. So I think what we do at LSIS of having speakers, different ones over and over, go to pretty much the same schools and tell their story, eventually someone would have told mine. And I would have heard all of those things, all of those private, weird things that we all go through in someone else's life and then heard how it played out and what they tried to do to medicate it. And I think that would have been really impactful for me. Yeah.
Here, and I noticed that in your story, you really take time to help kids hear who you were at that age. You talk about, like, I used to lie for no reason at all, and I thought something was wrong. And you actually, I love it because you almost every time you say, if any of you are struggling with that, you're not crazy, but you should probably try to stop. Yeah.
I would have loved to hear that in 4th grade. That would have been a big deal to me. So that's
Yeah, I think your recent, the last 5th grade that you did.
That was hilarious.
Like when you paused to talk about that, even before you even explained it, a lot of the kids said, I struggle with that, right? So then you tell them, okay, I challenge you to try to tell the truth. And then some of them like, it's going to be very difficult. And you have the ones that's like, okay. So you were able to explain to them, it's like, I've been there. This is what I gained from that. So the kids, they're like, oh, okay, so there's someone that's older that can relate. Because a lot of times the kids, they're like, okay, adults don't do that. It's just me. I'm the one that's lying, right? So they think, they're like, okay, it's just me. So then they start, like, letting their self feel down or their self-esteem and stuff like that. Now they stop talking.
Mm-hmm. One little boy came to Danny after the presentation, was middle school, and his eyes were like welling up with tears, and he was fighting to say, I have ADHD too. It was the sweetest thing. And then he was like, I gotta go. And he just like quickly scurried away.
Those are the best moments though, right? Like why we do what we do, to like get those moments too.
Prevention would have been best for me like in elementary school.
That's really good.
Very good.
Thank you. When you transition, I feel like I wasn't prepared for such a big change. Because in 5th grade, I remember feeling so excited and so like thrilled, and my outlook on life was very like positive. Like, here I go to take on the world, going into middle school, super excited. And then I went into middle school and it was so different. And I just remember feeling, I don't know if it was disappointment, just feeling maybe shock a little and just like, ooh, I don't know what to do with this. How do I like socialize? How do I engage? How do I, and there was a lot of things I questioned about myself, my interactions with people. Like I just took life head on and did what I thought as a 12-year-old that did the best that I could, I guess. But I think for me, as elementary school was so essential, and preparing students for middle school and having those difficult conversations. We didn't have that in elementary school, at least not that I remember. In those times, there was no discussion about drugs or nicotine or tobacco or anything. Maybe tobacco, actually, because we had a tobacco class, but not so much drugs at all. And now I'm hearing, though, that they're going into elementary schools to have discussions about prevention, which is great. And I wish I would have had that, because maybe that could have been, my preparation.
Well, and that's the thing, is like when I have parents who say, well, my kids are, 11 and 9 and they don't need it. I'm here for my students, or I'm here for something else, or whatever my professional capacity is. I try to like jump on it and say, well, now's the time. Now's the time, right? They are genuinely scared of middle school.
Because for the 5th grade, when you ask a 4th grader, are you ready to go to 5th grade? They're like super excited. So for 5th grade, when you ask them, how many of you nervous about middle school? They're like, oh my God, one of them like, is it gonna be more homework? So it's like, for them, it's like the dynamic will be shifting, because now it's like you're taking on the world kind of, because when you're in elementary school, when to get to class, someone's taking you to class, right? With middle school, it's a whole new world. No one is there to tell you, you have to be on class. You have like 2 minutes to get to class. So a lot of them, you get the other half that's excited, but still afraid, and then you got the one that's like terrified. And they're like, what do I do with that?
What about bullying?
Exactly. So we get the question about bullying. So then we ask them, like, who's your friend? So then that's when we ask them, like, the power of having like that good friend that's like, stick with you, finding that friend. So with them, it's that, strengthen them going to middle school, like making sure they have that confidence. Because a lot of time with the kids, I was like, do you guys know no is a complete sentence? So even just that, try to give them just that little power for them to realize how awesome they are. So
Well, substance abuse, here's the thing, though, is substance abuse prevention isn't about talking to your kids about drugs.
Exactly.
It's not about talking to your kids about drugs. It's actually about talking to your kids about setting good boundaries. Picking good friends. Noticing if your friends are getting interested in things that aren't good for you. Noticing if you tell your friends, I don't want to do that they don't listen. And learning how to change your friend group. It's so much more than saying drugs are bad. You shouldn't do that. I think parents don't often think of that because, in the field, I don't know that we have done historically a good job of teaching people that, right? I think we're doing much better. I think schools are much more focused on teaching those skills of, coping skills, communicating about your feelings, asking for help. I think some of that's better, but prevention's about talking about the other stuff, right? Like you said, like you talk to your son about the story you share together, right? You don't talk to him about how bad the drugs are. You talk about, like, did you see how hard it was? Like, how did you get through it? What did you use? Who were the people who were helpful, right? Getting him to recognize the strengths that he has,
Love that. And I love that you touched on the transition of like our childhood, because there's phases of our childhood. And I think a lot of times parents look at like, okay, they're just growing up, but those phases create a lot of overwhelming feelings and like a lot of stress and anxiety. And I think a lot of times it's just like, well, they're going to school and it's time for your next grade. And it's a missed opportunity to talk about what is coming up for someone. And that was with me, because I was isolated. My parents really tried to keep me away from harm by keeping me like really sheltered and in a small school. And we're going to protect you. And what ended up happening was similar to what you had mentioned about that transition. I went into a different school, much bigger school in 8th grade. And I was like, what is this? Wow. And, I had no knowledge of anything. If I had those conversations about the transitional phases of, I did feel scared. I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know how to be a friend. I didn't know how to start conversations. Those are the things we're talking about. It's not don't do drugs. It's, do you know how to make friends? Like, how do you approach that?
That's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
I went to like a 30 person per grade middle school, and then the high school wasn't that much bigger, but it was, and it was for all intents and purposes, because I went to a religious middle school and then a non-religious high school, so the bubble was burst. And like you said, I had no idea. Like my friendships had a very simple like stencil for when there was 20 of us, and I did not have any sort of conversation about what that would be like and how to navigate that, and that would have been really powerful.
I think parents don't realize that a lot of times when our kids are acting out, whether it's behaviors or even addiction, using drugs, self-harm, a lot of that is a symptom, you know, and it's not just, oh, they're using drugs, you know, let me just take them out of school, switch them to a different school or move away, you know, and for me, I put my son's in therapy, you know, just as a prevention to, so that he has somebody to go to talk to that's not part of his circle, that's not mom and dad, because of course whatever mom and dad says is like, we're going to do the opposite.
Yeah, you're not cool anymore.
You know, so, you know, that is my prevention for my son. And hopefully, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, like, because I've gone through what I've gone through and he knows my story and has seen me through the process, you know, of recovery, you know, knock on wood, if that was ever part of his story too, like he knows he has a therapist, he has a solution, he has, you know, a place to go. Whereas for me, you know, it carried on for so many years from 12 to 27 because I didn't necessarily know how to look for the resources or have the resources at my hand. I knew of a I knew that there was therapy. I knew that there was like medication, but I didn't really have the education or even, you know, anybody to really tell me like, hey, this is the way out. This is what you can do. So I don't know. I mean, I think for me, like prevention for our kids could be several things. For me, it's just been therapy.
Yeah, I think that speaks to like the next layer, right, of prevention, because it's about, you know, the skills they need to be able to say no to substances, but prevention's also about giving them the skills they need to ask for help anywhere along the path, right? If they have used and they have, you know, a parent has created an environment of like, here's where you go for help, they may turn there. You know, it's prevention's about all of the different skills that someone needs to not use substances, and one of the skills they need is, I need help. I need help. I'm sad. You know, my dad wants me to talk about my feelings at dinner, but I don't know how to do that. Somebody help me learn how to do that, right? Like it's help about a lot of different things. You know, I need help. All my friends have changed and I don't like them anymore, and I don't know how to make new ones.
And I think if we're talking prevention, you know, I get into a class or a school and I'm speaking, the students come up and they want to know more. So I think prevention's so important because it keeps giving. You know, it's like the gift that keeps on giving almost. The kids are excited, they want to hear, they find it cool. I at least know for me, you know, I was like interested in weird stuff when I was younger. So if people tell me like weird facts about something or like, I don't know, I would just fall for it. But I think that for the students to see and to be excited, they go on and they want to tell their friends about something and tell their parents, hey, look, you know what I learned in class today? And it's, you know, it's exciting for the kids if they hear it in the right form. And I don't know, I love when they get excited and they come up and they're like, I have more questions. And it's like, I gotta go.
Yeah, sorry, we're all out of time.
Yeah.
Like 8 of them there at once.
And they're like, can I? Oh,
That happens where they wrap around you and you're like, okay.
I love that you bring that up because we always tell parents, be informed, have the information. We want them to know and research it and stuff. And, you know, Danny, I'm constantly asking you to research stuff for me. And it's how has learning information and facts impacted the way you tell your story? Because ultimately, I think part of what I want families to understand is, yes, you go in and tell your story, but that is just the avenue we use for prevention, right? We also use, education about different substances, education about addiction. Parents don't need to have an addiction story to tell in order to do prevention. They could use a different avenue, the dinner table, talking about academics or whatever it is that they want to use, they use. For you, you use your story. So how has learning information impacted the way you tell your story?
Yeah, I can think of a lot of different examples. One of them is when kids ask about, when people start talking about gateway drugs, or when people start asking, okay, teachers will do this. Did we lead you to harder things? I'm like, we led me into rehab. I knew that to be true. I knew that to be true of some of my friends, but when we started really researching that and I started really seeing how different the narrative that some of these kids might hear is from the research. And that there are really like scary studies coming out about regular drug users' regular weed smokers' brains like 20 years later, about their memory, their IQ, the cognitive, all kinds of things, one after another, and that's the majority, the majority of people ending up in treatment before the age of 18 are there for weed. And so I started to answer that question more confidently. Before I was like, oh, well, it's the thing that actually affected me the most. And now I'm like, no, it's an addictive drug. It's an addictive drug, and someone lied to you because I couldn't stop. My friends couldn't stop. You guys probably know plenty of people in your classroom who couldn't stop. And then now there's also this research.
Right. You got to the fact of statistically this is what it was. And so like initially that wasn't your thought process, and now it just changed. And that's, I think, the piece that I want families to understand. It is so important to get the information.
And I can just say, from after what Danny was saying about knowing the facts has really helped me as a parent, because I approach it differently. Whereas, my nephew or other family members may be struggling in an area, and, a lot of times people want to just be like, oh, well, he's just experimenting. And then I can just come with the facts and be like, well, actually, this is what it does to his brain, or this is what they're going to go through. And whereas I probably would have fallen into that category of maybe just, it's socially acceptable to experiment at that age, where now it's like I can approach it with confidence. And I mean, I text you guys all the time and I'm like, what are the facts for because being a mom, I want to approach it with confidence as well, and knowing what's going on,
Can you think of any times, like at your dinner tables when you were kids, that your parents maybe missed an opportunity? Or even if it's not at the dinner table, like, can you look back and identify a chance where your parents could have intervened in some capacity to talk about it or meet a need or anything?
Oh, for sure. I mean, even just me being the youngest of my siblings, my oldest brother is struggling with alcoholism and has since I can remember. And I think identifying that to us and actually recognizing that instead of trying to shield us from it may have helped recognize what alcohol does do to you, why it is not good. My parents just thought, well, if we don't talk about it and we keep alcohol outside of the house, well, then they're not exposed to it and they won't touch it. But really it would have been nice to identify what's going on, because we all felt it, we all knew it, but it was not talked about.
There's this myth, right, that experimenting with substances is just a rite of passage, right? But it's not. It's not. It's not. Being exposed to teenagers using substances is a rite of passage, because that is going to happen, but using them doesn't have to be. Right. And I don't know that kids get that message enough. To get the message of it's going to happen. Someone is going to ask you. There is going to be a moment where someone is going to offer you a vape, weed, broccoli, or alcohol. It's as simple as explaining that to kids. I mean, Islarn, how many times are we out there and we say it's going to be a friend?
Yes.
And they're like,
Because a lot of time, because I asked them, I was like, growing up, for me, my parents warned me about strangers. I was like, with you guys, It's not strangers that's gonna come up to you and offer you drugs or alcohol. I was like, a lot of times it could be your best friend, it's someone you know, it could be a sibling. Because when you're around something, right, it seems like as if it's the norm. So sometimes I would go in and to like talk about social media. I was like, you don't know what's going on behind social media, but those people you guys look up to, the people that you know have an influence, those are the people that you're watching that are doing these things. So it seems like as if it's normal, everyone's doing it, but not everybody's doing it. But it's only the people that you see or the people that's around you. Because Danny talks about in his story that he thought that everybody was smoking in high school, but it's because he was only around the group of friends that was smoking with him. So in his mind, it's like, okay, everybody's doing it, or that's the thing.
And I remember that in my addiction too, was feeling very alienated from the world and feeling like this was my norm. And if you didn't do this, that was abnormal. My life became normal in a sense. And, you know, when people would talk about like sobriety or recovery or just people who drank normally, that was so abnormal for me. And it just made me realize now, like, what my thinking was like and how my perception in my world at that time was, because it did seem normal. I couldn't picture myself without it. And I think for me, that's why I stayed in it for so long, was because I just didn't think that there was anything outside of that. That was my normal. It became my normal. You know, and you're right, the music, like I know now my music has changed completely, because like there's a lot of music I used to listen to, and not because it's a trigger or anything, but just because I don't condone that kind of talk or behavior, or, you know, and I don't necessarily want my kids listening to it either. And so I remember like my first year of sobriety, just turning on music and realizing, oh no, we can't listen to this. You know,
it's a good thing you have that, because you have kids, like especially with high school, they will tell you, my parents doesn't understand me. Right? They don't try to understand me. They don't try not to communicate with them, because when you ask them, it's like, if something were to happen, right? Could you go to your parents? Could you ask a parent like an adult? So a lot of times, because parents, they're not talking about it, so they feel like, okay, if I bring it up, or it's like they won't understand, or they'll just automatically judge me. So when we go to the kids, when we're like having like the open conversation with them, here we are, like we're just meeting them for the first time, and yet they're like, you know, open up to us. They're like, oh, so this was a conversation. I learned this much. But it's just like, you know, if parents like talk more to their kids instead of like have conversation instead of confrontations. So I think that's like a big tool, like parents sometimes they don't want to see that.
Yeah, I think when you, to go back really far, I don't know how long ago you asked this, but when was there a missed opportunity in our household? I think my parents were so concerned and so like vehemently anti-drug, and my brothers were like, okay, and they never did it. And so when it came time when I started getting interested in that, it was confrontation. And maybe at that point, when someone's that far gone, it ends up just being confrontation. But that would, you know, points again to earlier. It could have been conversation, but it was never. Even my first exposure to it was my parents talking about my brother's friends, and it was confrontation. I was like, "Don't get away from these guys." And, so by the time I was doing it, it was something to hide from them, never to talk to them about, never to. Yeah.
A couple boxes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Safe
Safe to say.
Thank you.
Safe to say.
So I think the other thing that we ask kids a lot is perceptions of risk, right? We always want to get a sense for, you know, how dangerous do kids see these things? I think it was after your talk at one of the high schools, we had like a kid come over and say, what do you mean alcohol is a drug? Like, never even occurred to her that alcohol could be a drug, right? Like the perception of risk wasn't even there.
Wow.
And I think part of prevention is getting everyone, parents and kids, educated about the risk. Recently, someone asked, we were interviewed, and someone asked, you know, do you guys teach about use, misuse, moderation, and abuse? right? And I'm thinking like, well, they're teenagers.
Right. I was just thinking that.
They're teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. How did your families approach any discussion of alcohol? I've talked about, like, my parents are European, so, you know, my family had wine at the table. We all understood it was just for Dad. My mom actually didn't drink at all. And so moderation was modeled, not necessarily talked about. It became talked about when I was older and my dad knew I was going to be exposed to people who were drunk, which sadly Dad didn't think that was going to happen until I was like 25. And I was like, Dad, you're like 10 years too late here. It was actually about a company Christmas party. But Dad was like, yeah, some people act like they've never seen it. That was the start of the convo. And then we had our first conversation about moderate alcohol use. 10 years too late. But how did your family model, like, what is, because alcohol is socially acceptable. It just is.
Right.
It just is. And there's no denying that kids say, yeah, but the adults drink it. Now, sadly, they say the adults are smoking weed too. But, you know, how did your families approach that? Like, what was your experience of it? Because obviously your relationship with substances significantly changed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Danny on this. Like, it was confrontation. There was no conversation when they found out. And my dad drank, but I remember as a very young child, as young as 5, hearing him and my mom argue. And I would wake up to it. And I later found out it was because he was drinking excessively. So in front of me, I saw that they would drink moderately, but behind closed doors when I wasn't around, it was party on. Like, it was excessive drinking. So I think that played a part into my addiction later on, because I, you know, had to play roles of mom, wife, all these things where I had to portray or look like I was all these things, and I was an appropriate mom and good mom, and I was a good wife and all these things, but really behind closed doors, I was using excessively, you know, so that's, you know, what my family had taught me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's completely different model. What you see was this, but because they didn't talk or connect it, you never got to see what's the consequence of overuse, right? You just knew this was happening and then that was happening and didn't know how they tied together.
That is a part of addiction I always love to hammer home, is like the little invisible things that you might not see in someone. For me, it was earlier on. I mean, like you said, I was not able to be a quote unquote functional alcoholic, but even when I was able to make it to school and do my homework, it was like all these little things that are so not okay if you zoom in. Like, it's more important to me than my family now, right? If my friends are going here to do drugs and my family's here, where do I want to be? I'm lying to my parents about things I need money for. Sometimes I lie to them about where I'm going. The person who's not doing drugs but who's really lovable otherwise is no longer invited. I'm lying to my therapist. All these little things that are the mark of addiction, that don't look like someone, you know, with missing teeth on the side of the road. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, those are important factors.
Yeah, I think we always want to challenge that, like, you know, sure, I mean, I always like to talk about, like, and I think you and I had this conversation, sure, we can label it functioning, but the functioning level is just slowly going down and down and down. You know, it's the bar just keeps dropping, and I think, you know, families, prevention is about helping kids know, where's the bar? Where's the bar? Here it is. This is what we're proud of you for. This is what you should be proud of yourself for doing, you know, and really kind of focusing on that part. I think one of the things, because of course we're a school-based program, you know, and some of our viewers are school professionals, you know, they're teachers, some of them are parents, some of them are teachers, school counselors. I think schools always want to know, when could they step in and help a family? Because the truth is, there are times anybody who works with a family always, oh no, like I have to have this conversation. And I feel like if it feels like, oh no, you probably should have had a conversation sooner. So when do you, well, your son, I'm going to put you on the spot now because your son's in middle school.
Right.
When do you want them to talk to you?
As soon as any little sign that they see, honestly. I mean, I think the first sign for me is when his grades are dropping. He's usually pretty good about his grades, A, B for the most part, every now and then a C, but you know, anything lower than that is where I begin to worry. But I think what's, you know, for me, it would be if they begin to see him, maybe, I'd say maybe acting out in class, like doing things that he normally wouldn't do, you know, being disrespectful, maybe not turning in homework, like things that are just out of his norm, you know. So like he's always good about homework, he's always good about projects, putting in his best work and his best effort. So if the teachers were to see, and usually the teachers know your kids as good as you know them because they spend so much time with them. So I would think that like anything outside of his norm, not turning in homework on time, grades are slipping, skipping class, or there's somebody in the classroom that the teachers know is, you know, one of those kids that vape or that, you know, have heard that smoke weed, and they see, you know, other kids beginning to friend them. I think that's important too. I would like to know if I could be there every step of the way, every second of the day. I would, but I know that's not healthy. You know, so.
Yeah, so see, I think that's meaningful, right? For a school to know, you want to know right away if it seems he's becoming friends with a kid who's, you know, not making really good choices, right? To know that right away, to know he's just not himself. We did a master class on early intervention and early prevention, like, and early detection. Like we cover all of that. When do you step in? What should you be watching for? And, you know, what do you do? Right? So we talk about, you should actually, the earliest part is get to know the kid. Get to know the kid. And teachers, you're right, they do. But I think they don't realize how much they do sometimes because they have so many kids. You know? And I think that's it, is the more they understand them, and I think this is the key for parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think also too, the teachers a lot of times are just like with the kids, they're just like the kids. They're not as educated or knowledgeable on what the red flags are.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you know, because I've had teachers ask me questions that they had no idea about, like things that I would think, you know, so I don't know. I think it would be helpful if even the teachers had, you know, some type of education, prevention, you know, something that shows them or teaches them really what to look out for, when to speak up, when to talk to, you know, the families, you know, because of course they're there to be teachers, but also these are kids, and a lot of times you're that person that they trust to go to, or maybe you're that person that could potentially help somebody out or save a life even, you know?
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows the red flag. Oh, he's, you know, his grades have dropped and his friends have changed. And then it's crickets. It's not things like, you know, she seems to struggle with, you know, turning down saying no to her friends. She's, you know, she's getting bullied by people that used to be her friends, and she seems to take it, right? He seems to get really panicked if people are mad at him. You know, like being able to recognize those temperament things, right? You know, Lindsay, you talk about how much you looked up to your older brother. Well, you know, Lindsay seems to really look up to her older brother, but her older brother seems to be struggling.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, how are we addressing that,
right.
you know?
Right.
I think that's prevention. Absolutely. It's so much earlier than people think, and, you know, not my kid is the kiss of death. And I'm fairly certain none of your parents thought it was going to be you, right? Not my kid. Look, and not my kid, and not my kid, and not my kid, and not my kid.
I don't know about me. Maybe my parents. I don't know.
What came up for me too when you guys were sharing about like your father's drinking and stuff was the generational themes and how if we want to prevent those generational themes, we have to start now. Like that's it. And that's why even my kids being as young as they are, it's 3 and 4, I love hearing people speak who have older children because I'm like taking this information of like, okay, I need these conversations now because as they get older, it needs to be done with comfortability and confidence. I don't want just one day they turn 13 or 14 and I'm like, hey, let's talk about drugs or hey, let's, it's like, I don't want that awkward moment. I want it to be such a comfortable conversation if I don't want them to recreate what I grew up in or what I became.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the questions that the kids ask you all the time whenever you talk about like your kids, they always ask, when they get older, would you have this conversation with them? Because a lot of them, like, with middle and high school, they're curious. They're like, you telling us this now, but will you have the confidence to share that with your kids that this is what you went through? So I think that's like very important and so powerful. Like whenever you honest with them and they're like, oh wow, really? Right. So I think parents, be honest with the kids, like if you're having conversation with them, because they're curious too, because you once were a teenager. So now you act like you never was a teenager. So I think
they're pretty sure you were, but they're not 100%.
They're not 100% sure. So I think that's like a key component when it comes to like, starting the message earlier. Like be honest with your kid. If you have like a hard day at work, tell them you had a hard day at work instead of saying it was fine, honey. I'm good.
Right.
So starting early.
Starting early for sure. My dad didn't tell me, his struggles with other substances until I was 15. And I remember thinking like, first of all, I had no idea. But second of all, I remember feeling like, why are you telling me this now? Because now is like, at 15, it was already, I was there. I was in addiction, and I mean, maybe it could have helped too as a prevention thing for me, if I would have known a little bit sooner or had that conversation sooner.
Yeah, we talked about earlier modeling for kids, having a model for mental health discussions. And I love that we get to go in and model that. We don't even have to, talk about modeling it. We just model it. They see that we're someone who's not coming to lecture. We seem confident. We seem like normal people, and then we're like, hey, here's all this really vulnerable, horrifying things from my childhood, and then we walk away, and it's like, oh, that's a Tuesday. I'm gonna do this 7 more times now. But to parallel like what you were saying, my parents went through all kinds of things, and obviously they shouldn't share everything with me as a kid, but I didn't know any of it. And the not my kid thing, when you say that's the kiss of death, I think when you're talking about prevention and the signs, first parents have to actually believe that it's possible for it to be, because like when you look at all the kids in the high school, they all know who's doing what and it's not really, they know because they're not worried that there's no risk for them to be disappointed in it. They're just like, yeah, he does it. My parents desperately did not want to think me and my friends were doing that, and none of our parents were aware of it, even though one teacher looking at our friend group could be like, all right, this is not good.
Yeah. Well, not my kid means you don't notice when it's happening. Not my kid means you don't see the signs, and not my kid means you're not open to helping them if they've fallen down a hole.
Right. You're not open to paying attention.
Yeah, it starts with, it could be my kid and I don't want it to be. What do you guys hear from the students? What do you see they're struggling with today?
Vaping.
Vaping.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good answer.
Vaping, it all started all the way from 4th grade.
Yeah.
So it's vaping. That's like the big thing right now.
I would say another one I think I get whenever, students come at the end and they ask their questions is, I have this friend of mine, and what do I do for my friend?
Yeah.
And I think that's such a big one that the students will come up and ask. And I don't know if they're asking because they really do have their friend or if it's just them.
Yeah.
And, I always try to be transparent as much as I can with them and give them the best answer I can. That relates to some sort of my experience. But I think that that's a big one that they ask is, hey, what do we do? Or what do I do if I'm in this situation?
Yeah,
And
that's a big one.
Yeah.
Then that's when we normally we direct them to asking for help.
Correct.
Like asking the help the proper way. Like, who is the person in your life that you trust right now? Who's that one person you could talk to? Because for me, there's so much I could do. I could, give you, if you asking for help, here are the things that's available to you. We talk to the school professionals and see how we can help, and then they take it up from there, right?
And that's definitely one that I like to see parents take more charge of. One of our episodes, we had a family that had 3 daughters, 12, 14, and 16, I think were their ages. And one of the things that came up was, one of the girls said, my family, my friend was really struggling and I wanted to help her. My dad said, we're not collecting broken people. And Dad was clear. He said, look, we have enough stuff to stress about, and I don't want my kids to feel like they have to help and fix everyone, because if they do, it's never going to stop, right? And so I think that is something that I think you're right. Like, kids, this is happening everywhere, and kids don't know how to get help for their friends. And I think families, that is prevention, helping a family understand, here's how you can help, how far you can go, here's when you need to ask an adult, and here's where you might need to separate yourself. And you are going to feel bad. It's gonna feel sad. Might feel disloyal, or you might be like, oh, thank God. But to open the discussion of what might that be like for you. That's impactful. And I think just by having prevention conversations with the kids, parents can learn what the kids are dealing with and help them deal with it. So if you guys could sit down with parents and give them advice on what you've learned, not just from your experience with the kids, but what you've learned about how prevention can work, what it looks like, what advice would you give a parent?
I'll go last.
This made me think again back to when you said, what did you pick up from research that has become important to you? Because one of those things that we were talking about in the office one time was that there is pretty much a scientifically, they find over and over again research age that kids stop listening to their parents and start listening to their friends. Mm-hmm. And it's about 8th grade. Literally their mom's voices become less rewarding to their brain. At around that age. It's really startling. And so in a lot of those research papers, they'll say, all right, you have 13 years to become their friend. Which is, I think, a cool way of putting it. But not necessarily that they have to be like, I won't tell parents, be their friend and don't tell them what to do, but more really relating to all the things you just said about the steps that the kid has to understand about how to help someone or how to protect themselves. The message that's going to keep them from drugs has to have weight in itself. It can't just come from you as a parent. They have to really understand, and they have to learn it, and they have to grasp it, because you saying it is not going to matter to them really, really soon.
Yeah. So really the information, right?
Yeah.
Don't forget to get informed. Yes. Yeah. See, I say it all the time. I wish you could. Yeah. Lindsay, how about you?
So for me, I can only speak to where I am currently in my life, right?
Yeah.
So with my kids and being as young as they are, my prevention looks very different. And my prevention is definitely reflecting what I didn't get in my childhood, which is that identifying those feelings. So, when my kid does act out and I may put him in timeout, I always try to go back around and sit down and say, okay, what was going on for you? How were you feeling? Were you feeling frustrated? What's a better way we can do this?
These are going to be our Thai donuts.
Wow.
Yeah. The white sauce is a condensed milk, and the red sauce is a raspberry lychee jam.
You did not talk
These are our grilled pineapples. We grill them and torch them with sugar and coconut.
Wow, that's amazing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, right? Ooh la la.
I'm glad these are donuts and not cake. It looked like a cake when they're bringing it out because the whole.
Yeah.
And I was really overwhelmed. I was like, I can't do a whole cake right now.
Katie, what would you do?
I would say that the stress the importance to the children. Something that I learned, as an adult is like to pause, because I know children are young and they make sporadic decisions sometimes, maybe without much thought into it. I would say a good thing for a parent to teach a kid is, you're not responsible for your first thought. And you don't have to act on your first decision, even though
Absolutely.
that you may think that this is that da 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 da, you're able to have the pause and the reflection to really break it down and see what it is.
Yeah.
I think that's really important for a parent to have that communication and to articulate those things to their child in in an LSIS way, right? In like an age appropriate way. So there's that, and then I would also probably make sure the parents stress the importance to their kids of, like for me, I made a decision in 10th grade and I got kicked out of high school, and I spent the rest of my high school years in like this really scary alternative school. It was dark and dreary. But that one choice that I made, it affected the next 3 years of my life and on. I think that the importance of choice is nice for parents to talk about with their kids.
Yeah. See, I love that all the things you said, none of them were don't do drugs. Like all of it was way earlier. And I think this is why, we wanted to have all of you here today, because, I think every parent wants their kid not to end up in addiction. And I think hearing from each of you, not just because you're in recovery, but because you're doing prevention. You're able to give the perspective of how you do it now that you've had an opportunity to intentionally talk prevention, which is really what we're talking about, is helping parents be intentional about how they do prevention. So I want parents to hear from you. I think that there's power in hearing from someone, here's what I could have done different. And now that I know how to do it intentionally, I can piece together where my family could have done it a little different. And I think that's just so valuable. And, thank all of you for taking time out of your day and being here with us. And the food was phenomenal, by the way.
Food was so good.
Yeah.
That
cauliflower was phenomenal.
Yeah, yes, it was.
Yeah, it was.
But,
That was great.
yeah, no, thank you for having us. It's definitely a pleasure to be able to do this. It's not something, I always say, this is such a powerful thing because not everybody gets to do this. I'm so lucky to be standing up here.
One of the things we do as an organization is we always track how many kids are we talking to, right? And every year we want to reach more than we did last year. And this year, as of the end of February, we're at almost 63,000 kids this year. Danny's over like 10,000 this year because he's just killing it.
I love LSIS, and in fact, I'm trying to, wherever my kids go, I want to make sure you guys are.
That's true.
I ask my son all the time, have they gone to your school yet?
Hi, I'm Dr. Suzanne Spencer. I'm the CEO and the creator of the Talk with Your Mouthful podcast.
And I'm Teresa Barros. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am the program director at Living Skills in the Schools.
So, T, the end of our first season of the Talk with Your Mouthful podcast. I say first, we're
definitely doing more.
I mean, how, as we kind of look at all 5 that we've done, what have your thoughts been?
We have a series of episodes where everyone can kind of watch how do parents do this, how do kids respond, but they got to see how it's done with a facilitator, right? And this episode, I think we were able to really concretely describe what intentional prevention looks like. How does it go beyond, don't do that, it's a bad idea, and to be intentionally strategizing, promoting resilience, and noticing if something's wrong, and intervening if you need to. And I think this was the episode where we could talk about how people do it intentionally, whereas I think the other episodes we got to kind of model the subtlety of it. So I think it was just really comprehensive.
There's so many things I love about this episode. You really get to see the impact of their work with LSIS, how it served their long-term continued recovery. That like sitting on the outside watching, that was really powerful. But I think it was also powerful for our families who are watching and our school professionals who are watching to be able to hear firsthand and get inside sort of the mind and the experiences of someone who was struggling, and to hear what could help.
Right.
Here is what I needed. Here is what our kids are facing today. Here's a role that you play in part of, and so many others play, that add up to a comprehensive approach.
Right, right. What I love is that all of our speakers, they come from diverse backgrounds, but I think for every parent who says, not my kid, they don't really need it, if they were to look at each of our speakers' families, they wouldn't say, oh, someone from that family is definitely going to get it. Challenging the stigma. It's the first step towards prevention. And I think we were able to talk about that tonight. And the speakers' stories, help sort of highlight that.
I think the other thing that was powerful, and because we recognize this as LSIS every time we're in a classroom, that not only are we speaking to that child in hopes that they haven't started with experimentation yet, but we're also speaking to our kids who may have already been introduced to first use, may be in need of a deeper level of intervention. And all of that is encapsulated in that one message from each of those
And
speakers.
I think it's just because we were able to really talk about how do we do it versus the other episodes. I think we were just doing it. And, prevention, part of its power is in the subtlety. It's the relationship you create. It's the ease with which you talk. And I think we got to show that before, and this episode really helps highlight how we did what we did in the other episodes.
One of the reasons I think parents or caregivers may fear having the conversation with their kids is because they're thinking the child may say, well, did you do drugs? Do you drink? And I think having that fear alone kind of stops any introduction of the conversation.
Yeah.
But what today did was really frame it for parents of how to approach that and how to wrap that in a prevention message.
Right.
So that you're not just kind of sharing the experiences and the wild times you may have had as a parent back in the day, that you're relating that to of how that wraps into a prevention message or an even recovery message.
Right, right. Because all of them talk to kids about what they did and how it turned out. And yes, they ended up in rehab and in recovery. But for a parent who used substances when they were a teen, they can tell their story. You don't have to end up in rehab to be able to talk about your behaviors and be prevention, because prevention of the disease isn't necessarily you have to prevent it because I got it, I went to rehab. You can just as easily prevent using substances, because that's what we're talking about. Yes, we're talking about it, preventing the disease, but the way you do that is prevent underage use.
To all of our families out there, to all of our school professionals, we want to thank you for inviting LSIS into your homes, into your cars, into wherever you're watching us these days. I don't even know sometimes where podcasts can be watched, but thank you for allowing us to be your partners, to be part of your village, to play a positive influence on the way in which you feel capable to have these conversations with your kids, and the way in which you allow us to help you and act in a way that on your behalf to introduce these sensitive topics to your kids at a skill and age level that we take the utmost care and time with on your behalf.
Yeah, thank you. I was so happy to do this and be a part of it, and hope I never had anything in my teeth.
Oh my gosh, and thank you so much to Kapow. Food was off the, in fact, Dustin, I kept on saying to Dustin, could you pass me off the table this? Could you just pass me that? Let me have a bite. Everything looked fantastic. So Kapow, thank you so much for hosting our final episode. And thank you to our server, Anna. And thank you to everyone.
Thank you for watching the Talk with Your Mouth Full podcast.